The bald-headed man was already at the bar when they entered. On the polished wood before him were 2 hats and a double handful of coins. He raised his glass, but not to them. They stood up to the bar and ordered whiskeys, and the kid laid his money down. But the barman pushed it back with his thumb and nodded. "These here is on the judge," he said. They drank. The teamster set his glass down and looked at the kid, or he seemed to. You couldn't be sure of his gaze. The kid looked down the bar to where the judge stood. The bar was that tall not every man could even get his elbows up on it, but it came just to the judge's waist, and he stood with his hands placed flatwise on the wood, leaning slightly, as if about to give another. By now men were piling through the doorway, bleeding, covered in mud, cursing. They gathered about the judge. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. "Judge, how did you come to have the goods on that no account?" "Goods," said the judge. "When was you in Fort Smith?" "Fort Smith? Where did you know him to know all that stuff on him?" "You mean the Reverend Green?" "Yes, sir. I reckon you was in Fort Smith for ye come out here." "I was never in Fort Smith in my life." "Doubt that he was." They looked from one to the other. "Well, where was it you run up on him?" "I never laid eyes on the man before today. Never even heard of him." He raised his glass and drank. There was a strange silence in the room. The men looked like mud effigies. Finally, some began to laugh, then another. Soon, they were all laughing together. Someone bought the judge a drink. Had been raining for 16 days when he met Toadvine, and it was raining yet. He was still standing in the same saloon, and he had drunk up all his money save $2. The teamster had gone. The room was all but empty. The door stood open, and you could see the rain falling in the empty lot behind the hotel. He drained his glass and went out. There were boards laid across mud, and he followed the paling band of door light down toward the bat-board jakes at the bottom of the lot. Another man was coming up from the jakes, and they met halfway on the narrow planks. The man before him swayed slightly. His wet hat brim fell to his shoulders, surveying the front where it was pinned back. He held a bottle loosely in one hand. "You better get out off my way," he said. The kid wasn't going to do that, and he saw no use in discussing it. He kicked the man in the jaw. The man went down and got up again. He said, "I'm going to kill you." He swung with the bottle, and the kid ducked. And he swung again, and the kid stepped back. When the kid hit him, the man shattered the bottle against the side of his head. He went off the boards into the mud, and the man lunged after him with the jagged bottleneck and tried to stick it in his eye. The kid was fending with his hands, and they were slick with blood. He kept trying to reach into his boot for his knife. "Kill your ass," the man said. They slogged about in the dark of the lot, coming out of their boots. The kid had his knife now, and they circled crabwise, and when the man lurched at him, he swatted the man's shirt open. The man threw down the bottleneck and unsheathed an immense yellow knife from behind his neck. His hat had come off, and his black and ropey locks swung about his head, and he had codified his threats to the one-word kill like a crazed chant. "Thanks, cut," said one of several men standing along the walkway watching. "Kill, kill," slabard the man wading forward. But someone else was coming down the lot. Great steady sucking sounds like a cow. He was scurrying a huge shillelagh. He reached the kid first, and when he swung with the club, the kid went face down in the mud. He'd have died if someone hadn't turned him over. When he woke, it was daylight, and the rain had stopped, and he was looking up into the face of Alman with long hair, who was completely covered in mud. The man was saying something to him. "What?" said the kid. I said, "Are you quits?" quits. Quits. 'Cause if you want some more of me, you sure as hell going to get it. He looked at the sky, very high, very small, a buzzard. He looked at the man. Is my neck broke? He said. The man looked out over the lot and spat and looked at the boy again. Can you not get up? I don't know. I ain't tried. I never meant to break your neck. No, I meant to kill thee. They ain't nobody done it yet. He clawed at the mud and pushed himself up. The man was sitting on the planks with his boots alongside him. They ain't nothing wrong with you, he said. The kid looked about stiffly at the day. Where's my boots? He said. The man squinted at him. Flakes of dried mud fell from his face. I'm going to have to kill some son of a bitch if they got my boots, yonder. Looks like one of them. The kid labored off through the mud and fetched up one boot. He slogged about in the yard, feeling likely lumps of mud. This your knife, he said. The man squinted at him. Looks like it, he said. The kid pitched it to him, and he bent and picked it up and wiped the huge blade on his trouser leg. Thought somebody done stole you, he told the knife. The kid found his other boot and came and sat on the boards. His hands were huge, with moot donned. He wiped one of them briefly at his knee and let it fall again. They sat there side by side, looking out across the barren lot. There was a picket fence at the edge of the lot, and beyond the fence a boy was drawing water at a well, and there were chickens in the yard there. A man came from the dram shop door down the walk toward the outhouse, passed up to where they sat, and looked at them, and then stepped off into the mud. After a while, he came back and stepped off into the mud again, and went around and on up the walk. The kid looked at the man. His head was strangely narrow, and his hair was plastered up with mud, and a bizarre and primitive coiffure. On his forehead were burned the letters HT and lower end. Almost between the eyes the letter F, and these markings were splayed and garish as if thereon had been left too long. When he turned to look at the kid could see that he had near. He stood up and sheathed the knife and started up the walk with the boots in his hand. The kid rose and followed. Halfway to the hotel the man stopped and looked out at the mud. Anton sat down on the planks and pulled on the boots, mud and all. Then he rose and slogged off through the lot to pick something up. I want you to look here, he said, at my goddamned hat. You couldn't tell what it was. Something dead. He flapped it about and pulled it over his head and went on, and the kid followed. The dram house was a long, narrow hall, wainscoted with varnished boards. There were tables, pithwall, and spittoons on the floor. There were no patrons. The barman looked up when they entered, and a nigger that had been sweeping the floor stood, the broom against the wall, and went out. Where's Sidney? Said the man in his suit of mud. In the bed, I reckon. They went on Toadvine, called the barman. The kid looked back. The barman had come from behind the bar and was looking after them. They crossed from Theodore through the lobby of the hotel toward the stairs, leaving varied forms of mud behind them in the floor. As they started up the stairs, the clerk at the desk leaned and called to them, Toadvine. He stopped and looked back. He'll shoot you, old Sidney, old Sidney. They went on up the stairs. At the top of the landing was a long hall with a window light at the end. There were varnishy doors down the walls, set so close they might have been closets. Toadvine went on until he comitoed the end of the hall. He listened at the last door, and he eyed the kid. You got a match? The kid searched his pockets and came up with a crushed and stained wooden box. The man took it from him. Need a little tinder here, he said. He was crumbling the box and the bits against the door. He struck a match and set the pieces alight. He pushed the little pile of burning wood under the door and added more matches. "Is he in there?" said the boy. "That's what we're fixing to see." A dark curl of smoke rose, a blue flame of burning varnish. They squatted in the hallway and watched. Thin flames began to run up over the panels and dart back again. The watchers looked like forms excavated from a bogged out tap on the door now, said Toadvine. The kid rose. Toadvine stood up and waited. They could hear the flames crackling inside the room. The kid tapped. "You better tap louder than that. This man drinks some." He balled his fist and lambasted the door about 5 times. "Hellfire," said a voice. "Here he comes." They waited. "You hot son of a bitch," said the voice. Then the knob turned and the door opened. He stood in his underwear holding in one hand the towel he'd used to turn the doorknob with. When he saw them, he turned and started back into the room, but Toadvine seized him about the neck and rode him to the floor and held him by the hair and began to pry out an eyeball with his tongue. The man grabbed his wrist and bit it. "Kick his mouth in," called Toadvine. "Kick it." The kid stepped past them into the room and turned and kicked the man in the face. Toadvine held his head back by the hair. "Kick him," he called. "Ah, kick him, honey," he kicked. Toadvine pulled the bloody head around and looked at it, and let it flop to the floor, and he rose and kicked the man himself. 2 spectators were standing in the hallway. The door was completely afire and part of the wall and ceiling. They went out and down the hall. The clerk was coming up the steps 2 at a time. "Toadvine, you son of a bitch," he said. Toadvine was 4 steps above him, and when he kicked him, he caught him in the throat. That clerk sat down on the stairs. When the kid came past, he hit him in the side of the head, and that clerk slumped over and began to slide toward the landing. The kid stepped over him and went down to the lobby and crossed to the front door and out.